Hey, thanks for reading that section from 2 Corinthians. We're actually going to be looking at 3 of those verses from that section in a few minutes. But before we do that, I just want to kind of set up things a little bit for us today. I'm excited about this morning and being able to communicate this message to you, but I want to talk about the vision for just a moment. We as a church are excited about planting churches in small towns. Some of you who are part of Vitalpoint Church know this already, which is exciting. But for maybe those of you who are a little bit newer, we are launching or have launched our 4th location in Forest. And starting Easter Sunday, we will have regular gatherings in Forest, Ontario. And if you know people in that area, we'd love for you to be telling them about it, especially if they're not connected to a church. I mean, that's our priority is reaching those people who have maybe given up on church, walked away from church, never had a church experience. And just be aware of that I think it's so important as we consider what God is doing in and through Vitalpoint Church. And I'm super excited about that. So today, we're going to wrap up our series on prayer. And we're going to be talking about this idea of being with God. Now, when we planned this series, well over a year ago, we targeted February 2024 as our month of prayer. We weren't sure how Vitalpoint Church, you as a community, would respond. We knew that you would do the nice Christian thing and say, that was nice and prayer was important, but wow, have you ever responded? And we have been enjoying listening to the stories of people reaching out to us and sharing how this series has been impacting you. We're hearing stories from Connect groups that God is really doing a great deep work in the prayer area of your Connect group and just this beautiful reality of what is happening. Now, what is interesting about planning a series like this so far in advance, like over a year ago, is the theme of 2024 emerged late 2023, and it's this idea of unwavering faith. And what I've begun to discover in the planning of this, realizing that God's hand is on this, is that our unwavering faith is sustained through a life of prayer. And so when you think about the month of prayer, it's this supporting role it plays in our unwavering faith as individuals who are seeking to follow Jesus and us as a church in our desire to move forward with our kingdom assignment of planting churches in small towns. Now, I want to make a statement here that was given to me, and I want to give it to you that I think is important. It is said that when God is about to do something powerful, he stirs his people to pray. And when that statement was given to me, it was followed up with the reality of what happened in the early church in the book of Acts in the New Testament. You can read about this in Acts at the beginning, where the early church was about 120 people gathered together, and it's described as they were praying together with each other. But then following that, we see this beautiful image of 3,000 people being added to the church. See, when God is preparing to do something powerful, when God is initiating something new, oftentimes you will discover there were people who were praying. So when you look at the journey of faith, you begin to realize that prayer is that support system that goes beyond just the simple reality of talking to God. It's this reality of the base of unwavering faith and the movement of what God is doing. Now, on top of that, what really excites me about this topic of prayer over the month of February is that many of us are beginning to walk in obedience to the things that we're learning. Jesus talks about this, that when we apply the things that we learn, when we walk in obedience, we are being wise as if a wise man who builds his house on a firm foundation, so that when the winds blow and the storm comes, there is this unwavering faith. So the reality of this is that we are learning or relearning to step into prayer and learning how to be in this space with God. See, when we look at the topics that we've been looking at, the first week was talking to God. The second week was talking with God. And then the third week was listening to God. And today, being with God, we realize is that this is a movement of God that God is doing in and through our church. And it's a beautiful movement that's happening. But there's something I want us to consider when we think about prayer, because I don't want us to have this illusion that prayer is something that we do and instantly God answers, or instantly God moves, or instantly doors open and doors close, or so on. What I believe is that prayer is over the arc of time and the choosing of God answering the prayers when he chooses and desires to answer them. Let me give you an example of this. Early 2014, my wife and I were on a trip with a group of people to Israel. When we were in Israel, we knew that we were going to be that fall of 2014, we were going to be launching what is now called Vitalpoint Church. On that trip, there was a group of people, and we were at the location by the Sea of Galilee where Jesus fed the 5,000. There was a group of people that prayed over me and Desiree, my wife and I, that God would use us to reach people and make a difference in this world for God's kingdom. That same trip, I was at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, and I wrote out a simple little prayer on a piece of paper, and I crumpled it all up, and I slid it into a crack in that wall. And it was, God, please use us for your purposes in this world. What we're seeing right now across Vitalpoint Church is God answering those prayers. It has nothing to do with me or Desiree. It has everything to do with the reality that there was prayers given and offered that God is answering. See, prayer is not simply the grocery list of things that we bring to God. It is the pathway of asking God to move and to work. Prayer is not putting thoughts out into the universe. It is actually communing with the God who created the universe. It is not simple, I'm not sure what that word is, simpty. It's not the simple, empty meditative practices where we empty our minds. It is actually filling our minds and meditating through prayer on the heart and the mind of God. So prayer is the discipline that grows over time, revealing the power of God, the presence of God, and the fulfillment of the prayers at God's timing. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to deal with being with God, and my conviction is this, and I could be wrong, but my conviction is this, is that being with God is the actual foundation of the other 3 weeks that we've looked at. And I'm not going to review those weeks. You can go back on YouTube and watch those yourself or listen to them on iTunes or wherever we are at with all of our talks. So the being with God, to me, actually is a fulfillment of those other threes, or it's the foundation that gives life to those other three parts. Now, let me give you the reason why, and we're going to look at it from the passage that was read for us from 2 Corinthians chapter 3. I want to reread verses 16, 17, 18, and unpack this for us in a way that may surprise you as to being with God. Let me read it for us. 2 Corinthians 3, 16, 17, 18. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is a spirit, and where the spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. Now, when we read that on our own, we kind of look at that and scratch our heads and go, what in the world does that mean? That's why we discern the scriptures together in community. Well, what you need to know is that when Paul wrote this, the Apostle Paul wrote this letter, the church would have listened to this letter being read, and he was actually directing their attention to something they were familiar with an Old Testament personality by the name of Moses. We saw that in the first part that was read for us. Moses is described as a friend of God. What we need to know about Moses is this, is that God used him to deliver his people from Egypt. But the interesting part about Moses is that Moses would spend time with God. So, for example, he would go up on Mount Sinai and he would get the 10 Commandments, and he would come down with the 10 Commandments of spending time with God, and there would be this glow about him. There would be this external shift in his appearance that people would fall back from. You got to imagine, he goes up to be with God on the mountain, comes down, he's glowing so brightly that people can't be in his presence. So what he did was he put a veil over to cover that, to hide that, to cover the glory of God so that people can be with him. Now, it's important to understand a truth here. The time in which we're talking about is when God was in relationship with people through what is called the Old Covenant. This was the external reality of the relationship with God with his people. Now, it was based on God's compassion. It was based on God's patience, but it was held together with daily and yearly sacrifices and the law. And this was necessary for humans to understand the reality that they were unable to hold up their end of the relationship, and that there needed to be another way in which people could connect to God. So the Old Covenant is God's connection to them under the Old Covenant in the Old Testament. But the reality of the old covenant is it revealed that we can't uphold our end of the bargain, our end of the relationship. And the reason is the condition of our heart, is the condition of the centerpiece of our being. See, the centerpiece of our being, which is our heart, is described here, is blocked, is veiled by sin. So the human efforts, our human efforts, it's described that we all fall short of the glory of God. So Paul writes about this in Romans, that we can try to earn God's favor in pursuit of God, but we will always fall short because there is a veil over our heart that keeps us from God, which is sin. Even for many of us, it's why we spend much of our lives trying to figure out how to remove that veil to find purpose and meaning and freedom and so on. I mean, we wouldn't describe it that way, as a veil over our hearts, or we might see it as like a hamster on a wheel in a cage. When our kids had hamsters, they get on that wheel and they just spin and get absolutely nowhere. The reality of our sin is falling short because it's the veil over our lives, and it's just spinning because of the veil getting in the way. Paul, though, reveals something important here. This is all building in around this idea of being with God. In verse 16, but when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Like that one simple line is so incredibly powerful. So in the Old Testament, it was the external reality of God, and the glory of God would shine upon Moses and he would glow. Now we're talking about the new covenant, which is the internal reality of a relationship with Jesus, giving us the power to experience the glory of God. And out of that experience of the glory of God, of being with God, sitting in that being with God, is that we find this thing called freedom in the Spirit of God. This is key. Don't miss this. We find freedom from the pull and the power of sin that draws us away from God because of the internal reality of who Jesus Christ is, which enables us to sit in God's glory, to be with him. The veil has been lifted. Now, the reason why it says when one turns to the Lord is because the reality of the glory of the Lord is found in the person of Jesus. He actually says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. Look what it says. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. In the face of Jesus Christ. So, without Christ, we fall short of God's glory, but in Christ, we have access to the glory of God, which is the internal powerful reality that transforms us from the inside out. Not the external like Moses experienced, but the internal reality of who we are. Now listen, this is going to be hard for some of us to hear. You cannot create your own path to the glory of God. It is only through the glory of God revealed in the face of Jesus, the internal reality of that relationship. If you are dependent upon your religious rituals apart from Christ to keep you good with God, you're practicing a hollow religion that will leave you short of God's glory. So when you turn to God through Christ, there is freedom by the Spirit of God to experience the glory of God and to be with him. So prayer is giving us the right to be with God. Some of us need to hear this. We're trying to figure God out on our own. Some of us are exploring, some of us are seeking, and that's great. We talk about this idea of exploring the things of Jesus, exploring the things of faith and church, and the reality of what it means to be in relationship with God. But here's the thing. You are limiting your ability to fully understand and truly know this relationship with God if you're not willing to turn towards him. See, once a person turns towards him, doesn't mean that all your questions will go away and all your doubts will go away, but it is like removing the veil, allowing us to step into that relationship with God and to experience the glory of God in order through prayer to be with him. See the significance of this? See the depth of this? It's a reality check for some of us. Are we in relationship with Jesus, which enables us to be with God? Now, some of us are probably already scratching our heads and going, what is the glory of God? Like, if you're not asking that, I hope you are, because we need to figure that piece out. Because if we're not really sure what the glory of God is, then we can't have the transforming experience of prayer, of being with him. So the glory of God in the Greek language is a word doxa, which means supernatural splendor. I love that description. The supernatural. So it's outside of our natural ability, but there's a splendor to it. There's an awe to it. There's a reverence to it. In the Hebrew is kabod, which speaks of heavy, weighty, or impressive. When you see something that's impressive, you're in awe of it. You see the glory of it. For example, in creation, we can see this when the sun rises in the morning or sets at night. Right? We see a general revelation of God's glory in that. Or you, in a plane, you're flying out west and you go over the mountains. You see a demonstration of the glory of God displayed in the mountains. This is what's general revelation. In Romans chapter 1, it talks about this idea that we are without excuse because the glory of God is revealed in creation. But Paul is drawing us to a deeper reality. It's a specific grace-filled reality of the manifestation of God's glory in one's life when the veil is revealed, giving us the experience of who he is, changing us from the inside out. But notice where it happens. Notice where it happens. It happens in verse 18. It says, and we all with unveiled face, right? Beholding the glory of God, are being transformed in the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. It is found in the word behold. He says, beholding the glory of God. Here's what beholding is. Lean in. Some of you aren't leaning in. Just lean into the screen. Is this. It is practicing being still with God. See, this is a piece that we don't often think about, right? We think more of prayer as we've been talking about over the last 3 weeks. It's talking to God or at God or me doing all the talking. It is the practice of being still with God's glory. And in the practice of being still in God's glory, it transforms who we are in relationship with Jesus Christ. You could put it like this. The things that you behold the most in your life, the things that you prioritize, the things that you behold will shape who you are. Think about it this way. Let me give some practical examples of this. If it's true that what you sit with the most shapes you, and we're referring to this as the glory of God, I want you to think about someone who's consumed with watching the news, okay? These are just a few simple examples. Talk to someone who's consumed with the news, who watches CNN or Fox or some fringe outlet or CBC or whatever. Someone becomes consumed with it. It's on the background of their lives all the time, right? You get together with this person, you see that it has shaped their way of talking. You can actually see the development of how that has shaped them, right? This past summer, I was with a friend. I hadn't seen him in a very long time. Solid follower of Jesus. He and I have been friends for a long time. Out of nowhere, he starts talking about flat earth and completely caught me off guard. I was just there chilling, having a good time. And then all of a sudden, and then he started unpacking all these conspiracy things that he'd been watching and YouTube and so on and so forth. Now, listen, I mean, if flat earth or round earth, whatever, but it so caught me off guard because he had gone so deep into this that it had shaped him. Think politically. Think what happens to someone politically. They begin to be absorbed with the left or the right, and over time it shapes them. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of you are going to start emailing me about this. Listen, you can have your convictions, your political leanings, and so on and so forth. But if it consumes you, what will often happen is it shapes you to the point where you have very little room of people who have different views and opinions than you do. And oftentimes, in extreme cases, you see it shaping people to be angry and intolerant towards others. If that isn't landing, think about your phone. Oh yeah, we're going here. The phone. Think about your phone. You're on, some of us are still on Instagram and not graduated to like TikTok. So think about Instagram. You're scrolling through Instagram, right? You scroll, and you stop on a video because it's of a cat playing in its little area and you're like, oh, I like little kitty cats. I'm going to watch this. Your phone will go, oh, you like cat video. So you sat there in that moment. What happens is your phone, your Instagram will be filled with those things. For me, mine is CrossFit, hockey, sports, and so on, and motorcycles. That's what mine does because I love watching those particular videos. It shapes our phones to dictate how we live. When Paul says that we are to move from one degree of glory to the next, the reality is it comes from sitting in the glory of God. The idea of beholding is to gaze, to be captured by, to sit in, and to be transformed by. So the word behold is this idea of an open-faced reality because the veil has been removed, which permits us to sit in that space with God. But here's the thing. Like Moses, there will be a glow about you. I know you're like, you didn't know that, did you? But it's true. There will be something transformative that you may not even notice. Because the first time this happened to Moses, people didn't see it. He didn't know about it, but other people saw it. And this often happens for us. Look what Jesus says about this. I love this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, okay? This internal glow of the relationship with Jesus, right? The glory of Jesus inside of you, shining, let it shine, so that they may see your good works. So the things that we do, our actions, our deeds, our words, and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Here's what I want you to consider. Sitting with God is not simply just about you and God. The outflow of that will be the impact on the people around you that you do life with. There are some of us that are followers of Jesus listening to this that are terrified to talk about our faith, right? We're scared because we're believing the lie of the world that says people are not interested in talking about faith. I completely disagree with this. I think it's a lie of the evil one. My experience is completely different. People are very open. But here's the thing. When you sit with God, you don't have to worry about saying much because your life will be a reflection of your time with God. Let that sink in for a minute. Your time with God is the moving from glory to glory. It's a transformational work. So the time that we sit with God is the reality of moving us towards sitting with Him, being with Him, and then the reality of being transformed by Him. See, sometimes, and it's true, faith practices come in all shapes, sizes, and forms, but the faith practice and discipline of sitting with God is the deeper transformational work of the glory of God in our lives. This is why being with God is so key and so important. Now, some of you are like, okay, man, I have been spending most of my practices trying to impress God, trying to get His attention. I've been doing all this, God, just follow me, everything. Look at me, look at me. No. Now you're saying, what does it mean to sit then? How do I do this? I got 5 things for you real quick. 5 things off the top for practical steps. First is this. Ask God to help you learn to sit with Him in silence. I bet you didn't think about that, did you? You think you got to do this all on your own. You got to figure this out. No, it's asking God, how can I learn to sit in this space? Right? How do I do this? It's like getting to that place where like you watch an older couple in a restaurant that they've been married for 60 years. They can just be in each other's presence in silent and not have to talk. It's that idea of learning to sit in that space in silence. So God, just help me to learn to sit here. Second thing would be behold a quality of God. So the glory of God, maybe you behold His goodness or His kindness or His patience and the richness of a character quality of God. That's the glory. So you're going to behold that glory. You're going to gaze on it. You're going to fix yourself on that. Third thing, develop your own practice of beholding His glory. This is a key because you're different than I am. Like for me, when I sit with God, I have certain songs that I listen to that take me to that place of reflection on the glory of God. There's certain songs that I just absolutely love. I'll put my headphones in, or if I'm home alone, I've got my home system, I'll turn it up really loud and just sit there in that moment. Sometimes it deeply moves me. What is your practice to behold the glory of God? Find it, develop it. Fourth thing, simply show up each day. Don't underestimate the power of showing up. Just show up. Just be there. And even if it's like, even if you sit down and okay, God, Ron wants me to sit here. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to show up. Moses was described as being a friend of God, and he had a meeting of the tent. It's called the tent of the meeting. This was the place where he would go in and meet with God face to face, and he would come out of that, and there would be the evidence of the time with God. So simply show up. 5, set the timer and remove distractions. Amy talked about this at the beginning of our series. Remove the pressure. Some of us are trying to, I got to be here for 3 hours and I got to just, do my, no, set a few minutes. Remove the distractions, practice. Because here's what I'm convinced, that over time, as you learn to sit with God in his glory, you will get to a place where you will not be able to go a day without spending time with him. It's kind of like that feeling you have when you leave the house without your phone and you get halfway to work and you're like, oh no, what am I going to do without my phone? Do I go back and get it? Do I just go to work anyway and hope that no emergency, nothing blows up? That feeling that you have, that panic, sometimes we'll get to that place in our prayer life where we learn to sit with him so much that we go, I can't go without it. So set the timer, remove the distractions. All right. So here's the thing. We're wrapping this all up. We're bringing it to a conclusion and a couple minutes left. What are we going to do? Here's what I want us to do. I want us to consider that this is just the beginning. This is just the start. This is an ancient practice for a new day in which we live. And what I would love for us to consider is that we as a church will deepen our desire to be with God. That we as a church, that even though we can strategize about future sites and future locations and leadership development, that we can strategize and plan where we're going next, that we ourselves, within ourselves, with our playbook and our strategies and our own efforts, we can do these things. But I want us to recognize that we cannot do any of this without prayer. And that as a church, we together as a community, as individuals, as families, as connect groups, as student ministry and children's ministry and leadership environments and so on, that we would deepen our desire and the richness and the beauty of what it means to be with God. We as a church, I know for some of us, we're kind of like, we're in a stage of exploring. You're like, Ron, woo, man, you're really going after it today. And I'm not even sure some of these things. Hear me out on this. If you're at a stage where maybe you've not had the veil removed yet, you're still kind of searching, exploring, I want you to sign up for Alpha. It's coming up after Easter. It's a series of videos that we do together, and we're exploring the answers to meaning, life, and faith. So sign up for that. But for others of us, I'm convinced of this. Others of us, we needed this. It was like a 4-week spiritual kick in the butt, because for some of us, our prayer life is lackluster. It's on support, life support, and we simply needed to be jolted back to prayer. God often stirs his people to pray because he wants to continue to do great things. May we be a church that desires to talk to God, to spend time talking with God, learning to listen to God, and learning to be with God.